Hello and welcome students. I am Parijat Chakraborty from BMath first year, ISI Bangalore. First of all, congratulations on having performed splendidly in the limit exam, as a result of which you have been selected for the camp. Now I'll be taking this lecture on set theory. Set theory is among the most fundamental topics in maths. Its results shall be used throughout our camp. So let's begin. To start with, these are some notations that we shall be using. This symbol means belongs to. The reverse of the above symbol means such that. Upside down A means for all, reverse E means there exists. The following are notations for intervals in real numbers. For example, closed A, B means the set of real numbers between A and B both included. Open A, B mean the set of real numbers between A and B both excluded. However, note that this notation is the same as the ordered pair A, B, so be careful to note the context of this notation. This notation means the set of real numbers between A and B, A excluded but B included. Similarly, this means the set of real numbers between A and B, B excluded and A included. This notation n engulfed between closed brackets means the set of real natural numbers less than or equal to n. Now let's begin with the definition of sets. A set is an unordered collection of well-defined and distinct objects. The objects in a set are called its elements. The following are the ways of set representation. One is roster form, in which we describe the set by listing out the elements, for example 1, 2 and 3. Another way we can mention a set is by the set builder form, where we give a necessary and sufficient condition which the elements must satisfy. For example, the above set can also be represented as n such that n is a natural number and n less than 4. Clearly these two sets are the same. Now, subsets and elements. Consider two sets A and B and an object A. We say A belongs to A if and only if A belongs to A, that is A contains A. Here A is called an element of A. By this symbol we mean subset of. A is a subset of B if X belongs to A implies X belongs to B. We can also refer to it as B is a superset of A, or by this notation. We say A is a proper subset of B when A is a subset of B and there exists a B belonging to B such that B does not belong to A. We say that A is empty if there does not exist any A belonging to A, that is A has no element. We denote this set as phi and call it the null set or the empty set. Now in our scope, any set which contains all sets being considered as a subset, that is it is a common superset of every set, is called a universal set. By this notation or NA, we mean the size of A. For now, if A is finite, it is the number of elements, else it is infinity. We say two sets are equal if and only if A is a subset of B and B is a subset of A. That is, if an element is in A, it is also in B. If an element is in B, it is also in A. That is, both of them have the same elements. Now here are some examples of sets. Consider this set, consisting of A, B and 1. The set of objects named A, B and 1. Note that by unordered we mean that any arrangement or permutation of the objects within the set gives us the same set. For example, AB1 is equal to B1A. There is no difference. Also, if two of them are the same, say A equal to B, then AB1 is A and 1 because A and B are not distinct. These two sets are the same. Similarly, we could have said AB1 is the same as A and 1 when B is equal to 1, and cases like this. This set here is the set of all reciprocals of natural numbers. This is a common notation for the set of natural numbers, the set of integers, Z, Q the set of rational numbers, R the set of real numbers, C the set of complex numbers. As we know, natural numbers are a subset of integers, which are a subset of rationals, subset of real numbers, subset of complex numbers. Also note that our set A here is a subset of rational numbers, however, A is not a subset of integers. Now, let us look at some operations on sets, unions, intersections and cross products. By A union B, that is this notation, we mean the all the elements of U such that the element belongs in A or the element belongs in B. That is, X belongs to U such that X belongs to A or X belongs to B. This set is called the union of A and B. By this we mean the intersection of A and B, which is defined as X belongs to U such that X belongs to A and X belongs to B. A cross B, or the Cartesian product of A and B, is the set of ordered pairs A comma B such that A belongs to A and B belongs to B. Now, similar definitions can be given for a family of subsets, like A union B can be defined for an arbitrary number of sets. However, the definition for Cartesian product is valid only for finite Cartesian products. Take an example, let AI be a collection of sets, a family of sets in U, I belonging to L, where L is an indexing set. Union over I belonging to L, is defined as all X in U such that there exists an I in the indexing set L such that X belongs to AI. Similarly, we can define intersections of arbitrary sets, but as mentioned again, we need finite number of sets for a family of sets and for Cartesian products, that is. Negations and differences. Consider two sets A and B, subsets of a larger set U. We say that A is not a subset of B by this notation. That is, there exists an element in A which does not belong in B. Now, by this notation we mean the complement of A in U, which is all X belonging to U such that X does not belong to A. A minus B is the set of all elements in A which don't belong in B, and therefore is the same as A intersection B complement. This set is called the difference of A from B. By this notation we mean the symmetric difference of A and B. It is the set of all elements in A or B, but the element in this set must not be in both of A and B. Hence, this is defined as A union B minus A intersection B. We can easily show that this is the same as A minus B union B minus A. Now, let's look at an interesting situation, a paradox. Consider these two words, autological and heterological. Okay. An adjective is autological if it describes itself. For example, the word unhyphenated. Unhyphenated is an unhyphenated word, hence it is autological. An adjective is heterological if it does not describe itself. For example, the word hyphenated. The word hyphenated is not hyphenated, hence it is heterological. Now note that autological is an autological word. But consider heterological. Is it heterological? If the answer is no, that means heterological is autological, which implies heterological describes itself. That is, heterological must be heterological, which gives us a contradiction. So the answer can't be no. So if the answer is yes, that is, heterological is heterological. That means heterological does not describe itself. That means it is not heterological. We arrive at a contradiction again. Hence the answer to this question can't be no and it can't be yes too. Hence a paradox. Now, a similar paradox was observed by mathematicians, namely Bertrand Russell and Ernst Zermelo, in the early 1900s. Russell considered the set of all sets, name it S. Note that, as per our definition of sets, this set S is well defined because the elements of our S are sets, and sets to us is well defined. Now note that since S is the set of all sets, S is an interesting property. S itself belongs to S. Now consider D, a subset of S, which is equal to all subsets in S such that that subset does not belong to itself. As S exists, D exists too. No contradiction in our definitions. Now the main question, does D belong to D? If yes, that is, D belongs to D, D must satisfy the defining condition, that is this one. which implies D does not belong to D. We get a contradiction. So let us consider if this question's answer had been no, that is, D does not belong to D, implies D satisfies the defining condition of D, which also implies D belongs to D. Hence, we arrive at a contradiction again. Again, the answer to this question can't be yes and no. Hence, we arrive at a paradox. This is known as Russell's paradox or sometimes Russell-Zermelo paradox. Now, the main reason we arrive at this paradox is because the set theory we use in general is naive set theory, and due to a loose approach, it leads to such a paradox. Unless we assume that sets such as S do not exist. But that also means that somewhere in our set theory there is a flaw, and hence a solution to this is required. We introduce to you Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory. The above paradox demanded our foundations of set theory to be changed. In 1908, Ernst Zermelo proposed an axiomatization of set theory, which was modified further by Zermelo and Abraham Fraenkel in the 1920s. This theory is the canonical axiomatic set theory to the present day and came to be known as the Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory. We will see some axioms of ZF, but in a very informal way, as dealing with ZF rigorously requires more knowledge. Here are some axioms. Axiom schema of specification. For all sets A, there exists a subset B of A such that for all x belonging to A, x belonging to B, if and only if phi holds for x. Now, phi here does not denote the empty set, okay? It denotes any valid formula in the language of set theory. By any valid formula, we mean a condition. Very loosely speaking, a condition. Again, we can very informally say that for this B, it must be expressible in the set builder notation. Now, look at axiom of pairing. For all sets A and B, there exists a set C such that for all sets D, D belonging to C, if and only if D is equal to A or D is equal to B. Axiom of power set. For all sets A, there exists a set. This notation means the power set, which we'll see. There is a set P of A such that for all sets B, B belongs to P of A if and only if B is a subset of A. That is, B is a subset of A implies it is in the power set, and the power set is actually the collection of all subsets of A. Now there are more axioms in ZF like axiom of extensionality, axiom of regularity, axiom of union, etc. However, we shall not mention all of them here. In brief, axiom schema of specification puts the main restrictions on sets such as S and D in Russell's paradox, because of which they can't exist as per ZF. As you can see that S can't be expressed in set builder notation in a valid formula in the language of set theory. That's why it can't exist as per ZF. Now that we have resolved the matter on Russell's paradox, we will go to relations on sets. However, before discussing this, please note that in ZF most axioms lead to formation of a set theory that is very similar to naive set theory. If we don't consider sets such as S, the set of all sets, we are mostly fine in naive set theory. So all the axioms and the way we go about in naive set theory is similar after defining ZF. Now relations on sets. Consider two sets A and B. Let R be a subset of the Cartesian product of A and B. Then R is called a relation between A and B. Let A be the set containing 1 and 2, B be the set containing A and B, then R equal to the set of ordered pairs 1, A, 1, B and 2, B is a relation. Say if A comma B belongs to R, the ordered pair A and B belongs to R, we denote it as A is R related to B. This is how it is read as. We shall mostly be interested in cases where B is equal to A, that is R is a subset of A cross A. We will consider a few specific types of relations, but look at these definitions first. X equal to the set of all A in A such that there exists a B in B such that the ordered pair A comma B belongs to R. This set X is called the domain of the relation R. Consider the set Y, which is the set of all B belongs to B such that there exists an A in A such that the ordered pair A comma B belongs to R. The set Y is called the range of the relation R. The set B is also called the codomain of the relation R. Now that we are done with the definitions of things related to relations, let us consider types of relations. We say R is reflexive. Now note that R is a relation from A to A or simply a relation on A. By that we mean R is a subset of A cross A. We say R is reflexive if for all A in A is R related to A. We say R is symmetric if for all A and B in A related to B by the relation R implies B is R related to A. We say R is antisymmetric if for all A and B in A related to B and B related to A implies A is equal to B. We say R is transitive if for all A, B and C in A related to B and B related to C implies A is related to C. Now, by combining certain of these conditions, we get another type of equivalence relation. If R is reflexive, symmetric and transitive, we call it to be an equivalence relation. This is a very important type of relation. We will see a bit more soon in the next slides. If R is reflexive, antisymmetric and transitive, we call it to be an order relation, in particular a partial order. However, we won't deal much about it in this course. Now look at some examples of relations. Let A be any set and R be the set consisting of ordered pairs x, x such that x is in A. This is a relation on the set A. This relation is called the identity relation. Clearly it is reflexive, symmetric and transitive, hence it is an equivalence relation on A. Let A be the set containing 1, 2 and 3 and R be the set of all ordered pairs 1, 1, 1, 2 and 2, 1. Note that R is a symmetric relation and not reflexive and transitive. This is because 2, 2 is not in R. Similarly, one can form examples of relations on sets which are reflexive only or transitive only. If we look at another example R, which is the set of all ordered pairs in R cross R, often referred to as R2, such that 7 divides, this notation means divides, 7 divides the absolute value of x minus y or the mod x minus y. This R is a relation on reals. Check that this is an equivalence relation. Consider another example R consisting of the ordered pairs xy in R2 such that x is less than or equal to y. R is a relation on reals. R is reflexive, transitive and antisymmetric. This time R is a partial order on reals. Now let us consider some special types of relations. Functions. Let f be a relation from A to B. F is called a function or a map from A to B if for all A in A there exists a unique B in B such that A is f related to B. A pretty alternate representation of functions is f from A to B such that f of A is equal to B, that is A is f related to B. Functions are useful to us because they help us construct numerous mathematical models. They can be viewed as machines of our world which operate on a set and give us another set following certain protocols and rules. That is how we define the function. Now here are some definitions regarding things related to functions. Let f a to b be a function, then the domain of a function is the set on which a function operates. It is generally denoted by d subscript f. Here, in this case, d subscript f, or our domain, is a. The range of function is the set of all possible resulting values of the function. It is generally denoted by r subscript f. Codomain of a function, the set in which all possible resulting values of the function are constrained to line, is called its codomain. In our f, b is the codomain. Note that the way we have defined range and codomain, the range of f is always a subset of b, that is our codomain. Please note that any function which doesn't give a defined output for any element of the domain of f is not a valid function. For example, define f from R to R such that x goes from x is mapped to 1 by x. We can see that f is not defined at 0, hence it is not a valid function. If we had excluded 0 from our domain, our f would have been valid. Again, if there exists a functional value which doesn't lie in the codomain specified, the function is invalid. Say consider a function x goes to 1 by x again, and we eliminate the value of half from our codomain, but we know that 2 has to go to half, and if half is not in our codomain, our function is not valid. This is what this statement means. Let us look at some types of functions. Again, f a to b is a function. Injective functions. The function f is said to be injective or one-to-one if fx equal to f5, if and only if x equal to y. Check that when we are dealing with finite sets A and B, the cardinality of A is less than equal to the cardinality of B whenever f is injective. This implies this fact. An injective function, that is, from our definition we can understand, in an injective function, every element is mapped to a distinct element. Now surjective functions. We say f is surjective or onto if for all b in B there exists an a in A such that f of A is equal to B. Note that an equivalent condition for surjectivity is that the range of f is equal to B. Check that f is surjective implies the cardinality of A is greater than or equal to the cardinality of B. Bijective functions, we say f is bijective if it is injective and surjective. Clearly, as f is injective and surjective, f is bijective must imply the cardinality of A is equal to the cardinality of B. However, note that the results derived about the cardinality of sets in the above points talk about the number of elements only when finite sets are in consideration. However, when A and B are infinite sets, these results compare the sizes of the sets, but the notion of sizes is not completely defined here. We will not discuss it here, you will see it in other courses. Here are some examples of functions. Consider f from R to R such that fx is x square for all x in R. Note that f is neither injective nor surjective. As you can see that negative reals are not taken by function f, and 2 and minus 2 take the same value 4. Hence it is not injective and not surjective. However, if we define f from A to R where A is the set of all non-negative reals, f becomes injective because now the negative reals are not with us, hence 4 is mapped to only by 2, and similarly for other reals. Hence f becomes injective, but still f is not surjective because of the negative reals. So now if we define f from A to A, f becomes surjective too, and thus f becomes a bijection. So a function need not be injective or surjective, but making certain changes to its domain or codomain can make it injective, surjective, and hence a bijection. Another example, an interesting one, is a function from natural numbers crossed with natural numbers to natural numbers. such that G maps the ordered pair a comma b to the natural number 2 power a minus 1 multiplied with 2b minus 1. Check that this is a bijection. Now here are some other facts related to function. Note that if our function f from a to b is bijective, then there exists a function g mapping b to a, taking b to a, such that gb is equal to a if and only if fa is equal to b. We then say that g is the inverse of f, or f is invertible with inverse g. It is usually denoted by f raised to the power minus 1. Now here is a small lemma. The inverse of a bijective function is unique. The proof is left as an exercise. In fact, try to show that the above condition that f is bijective implies there exists such a function is actually an if and only if statement. That is, f is bijective if and only if there exists a function g from b to a such that gb equal to a if and only if fa equal to b. Now if a is a subset of b, then the map f a to b defined as f of a equal to a for all a in a is called the inclusion map. If b equal to a in the above map, we say f is the identity map on a, and we denote it by 1 with a subscript a. Composition of functions. Let f a to b and g from b to c be two functions. By composing two functions, we mean the function h from a to c such that h of a is equal to g of f of a for all a in a. This function h is denoted by g of f. This symbol is read as of a circle. Here are some examples. Say fx equal to x square and gx equal to square root x. There are two functions on reals and non-negative reals respectively. Then f of g of x is the identity function x, and g of f of x is equal to mod of x. Hence we can see that f of g and g of f need not be equal. Let a be the set 1, 2, 3, 4. Define the function f a to a such that f of n is equal to r plus 1, where r is the non-negative remainder when n is divided by 4. That is, 1 is mapped to 2, 2 is mapped to 3, 3 is mapped to 4, and 4 is mapped to 1. Now check that if we compose f 4 times, it gives us the identity function, that is f of f of f of f of any a in a is a. Such a function is called a 4 cycle. You will see such functions a lot in higher mathematics. These are very useful in some algebraic structures. Now some results on composition of functions. Let f and g be two functions, f from a to b and g from b to c. G of f is injective if and only if f is injective and g is injective on the range of f. Proof. First we prove the right hand direction, that is g of f is injective implies f is injective and g is injective on range of f. Let x and y in a such that fx is equal to fy, which implies g of fx is equal to g of fy. Now as g of f is injective, this implies x is equal to y. Thus if x equal to fy implies x equal to y. Hence our f is injective. Now let a and b be elements of the range of f such that g of a is equal to g of b, which implies there exists x and y in a such that f of x equal to a and f of y equal to b, and thus g of f of x is equal to g of f of y, which implies x equal to y again because g of f is injective. Hence f of x equal to f of y, which implies a is equal to b. Thus g is injective on the range of f. Hence we have proven that f is injective and g is injective on the range of f. Now let's proceed to the other direction, that is f is injective and g is injective on the range of f implies g of f is injective. Let x and y belong to A such that g of f of x is equal to g of f of y, which implies the definition, that is g of f of x is equal to g of f of y, which implies fx equal to f(phi), as g is injective on the range of f, and clearly f of x and f of y are elements of range of f, which implies x equal to y because fx equal to f(phi) implies x equal to y as f is injective. Thus g of f of x equal to g of f of y implies x equal to y, thus g of f is injective. Hence we have proven both directions and our proof is done. Another similar result, g of f is surjective if and only if g is surjective on the range of f. So first, the right hand direction, let c belong to c be an arbitrary element. Then there exists a belonging to a such that g of f of a is equal to c, because g of f is surjective, which implies there exists z belonging to range of f such that gz is equal to c. Thus for all c belonging to c, there exists z belonging to range of f such that g of z equal to c, which implies g is surjective on the range of f. Hence this deduction is done. Let us look at the other direction, that is g is surjective on the range of f implies g of f is surjective. Let c belonging to c be an arbitrary element, then there exists z belonging to range of f such that g of z is equal to c. As z is in range of f, there exists an a in a such that f of a equal to z, implies there exists an a and a such that g of f of a is equal to c. As our c was arbitrary, for all c the above statement is true, hence g of f is surjective. Thus both the directions are done and our proof is complete. An exercise for you, rather it is actually done. Thus the g of f, the composition function, is a bijection if and only if f is injective and g is bijective on the range of f. This is the result one can obtain by combining the above two results. Here are some other results. Let f from a to b and g from b to c be bijective functions. F inverse is also a bijection. This proof is left as an exercise. And if g of is invertible, rather this thing implies that g of is invertible and g of f whole inverse is equal to f inverse of g inverse. The proof goes like this: as f and g are bijections, g of f is also a bijection from the result we proved in the previous page. Hence inverses of f, g and g of f exist. Now let c belonging to c be arbitrary and f inverse of g inverse of c be equal to d. If and only if f inverse of g inverse of c is equal to d, if and only if g inverse of c is equal to f of d, if and only if c is equal to g of f of d. In the previous two steps, we have used the property of inverse for f inverse and g inverse. That is, f inverse of g inverse of c equal to d if and only if g inverse of c equal to f of d. This is the property of f inverse. The second if and only if statement is the property of g inverse. Now due to the above deduction and the uniqueness of inverse, which had been spotted as a lemma while we had defined inverse, this implies g of f a whole inverse is equal to f inverse of g inverse. Now let f a to b and g b to a be two functions. F of g is equal to the identity on b, and g of f is equal to the identity on a. If this holds, this condition is an equivalent to, that is, this condition if and only if f and g are invertible and g is equal to f inverse. This proof is left as an exercise. Now till now we have seen properties of functions and functions operating on elements of sets. Now we will consider functions which operate on the set directly. Earlier we defined the inverse function only when our original function was bijective. However, we can define another kind of inverse function in the following way for any function f. Let f be a function from a to b, we define f inverse from the power set of b to the power set of a such that f inverse of y is equal to the set of all a in a such that f of a belongs to y. This is defined as like this for all y subset of b. We will see later that this definition gives us certain advantages which we will see in later slides. And note that in the case of the inverse we defined for a bijective function, we could have defined it only if the function was bijective. If the function wasn't bijective, that is, if it was not injective or it was not surjective, either we could not define f inverse for certain elements of B because they have not been mapped to by f, or if we try to define an element, if we try to define f inverse for an element in B, we end up having more than one options because f is not injective and hence 2, 3, 4 numerable elements mapped to the same element in B. But here in this case no such thing arises. Also, if say there is no a in A for which f of a is in Y, for that f inverse of y is actually the empty set phi, which is also a subset of B, which is also a subset of A, sorry. Now let us continue. The above definition also motivates us for the following notation. For a given function f a to b, for all subsets C of A, f of C denotes the set of all B in B such that there exists a C in C for which f of C is equal to B. Now this is just a notational abuse as f does not operate on sets directly. For simplicity this is used. However, one might formally define a function caps f subscript small f operating on the power set of A to the power set of B in a similar fashion as shown above. Take an example. Let f be defined from R to R such that f of x is equal to x square. Then f of the closed interval -1, 2 is equal to the closed interval 0, 4. F of the rationals is equal to a set of q square such that q belongs to rationals, and f of reals, that is our domain, is actually equal to the non-negative reals. Another fact is f inverse of the interval 0, 4 is equal to the closed interval -2, 2. F inverse of the closed interval 1, 9 is the union of two closed intervals -3, -1 and 1, 3. Also, f inverse of negative reals is the empty set because obviously f of x is equal to x square is a non-negative function. F does not take any value which is negative. Now here is some properties of the functions operating on subsets. Let f be a function from x to y and let a, b be arbitrary subsets of x and c, d be arbitrary subsets of y. The following results hold. The proofs of these results are an exercise for you. F of a union b is equal to f of a union f of b, that is f distributes over the union operation. F of a intersection b is a subset of f of a intersection f of b. This always holds, however, the equality did not always hold. You can check some examples in which it doesn't hold and in which it holds. A small claim is if for all a and b subset of x, f of a intersection b is equal to f of a intersection f of b, if and only if f is injective. That is, these conditions are equivalent. If for all a and b subset of x, f of the equality holds, that implies f is injective, and f is injective implies for all a and b subset of x, the equality holds. It is trivially true that f of phi is equal to phi, and check that neither of f of a complement and f of a whole complement needs to be subset of the other. You can easily find examples for this fact, and also you can find examples in which the inequalities hold. Now, after having looked at subsets of x, f operating on subsets of x, now let's look at f inverse, which operates on subsets of y. F inverse of C union D is equal to F inverse C union F inverse D. This is true for any function. Now, f inverse c intersection d is equal to f inverse c intersection f inverse d. This holds for any f, and we don't need any other condition on f for the equality to hold. F inverse phi is phi, and f inverse d complement is equal to f inverse d whole complement. Now, these last four equalities in the above list are the reason defining inverse functions the way we did is helpful. Now, permutation of a set. Let f a to a be a bijection. Then observe that f actually sends one element to another unique element. It is like renaming the elements. Say A is the set containing 1, 2, 3 and 4. And say f of 1 is 3, f of 2 is 1, f of 3 is 4 and f of 4 is 2. Loosely speaking, f sends 1, 2, 3, 4 to 3, 1, 4, 2. Thus, it permutes the elements in a sense. Thus, any bijection f a to a is called a permutation function. Now note the following points. The set of all bijections on a set A is denoted by bij A. Now this set has certain interesting properties. If f and g are elements of bijections of A, then f of g and g of f are also elements of bijections of A. If f is an element of bijections of A on A, then f inverse is also an element of bijections of A. Now note that this point and the above point implies that f of f inverse, that is the identity on A, is also an element. Now the above properties of bijections on A help us define algebraic structures on bijections of A with the help of composition of two functions. However, this will be covered under group theory later. Partition. Let S be a set, and let A equal to AL be a family of subsets with indexing set L. We say A is exhaustive if union of L belonging to L over ALs is equal to S. That is, the union of this collection of sets covers all of S and hence exhausts our space. That is why exhaustive. We say A is mutually exclusive if AJ intersection AI is equal to phi for all I and j in the indexing set L and I not equal to j. That is, A i's don't touch each other. That is why they have no intersection. Now we say A is a partition of S if it is both exhaustive and mutually exclusive. For a finite set S, using some combinatorics, we can determine the relative sizes of sets. For example, we can show that sum of sizes of all sets of an exhaustive family is greater than or equal to the size of the set with equality if and only if the family is a partition. Such results help us in computing or approximating sizes of sets as well as in probability to compute numerous probabilities. Now, equivalence classes. Let tilde be an equivalence relation on A and let A be an element of A. Close bracket A denotes the set of all x in A such that A is related to x by the relation tilde. This notation A in close brackets is called the equivalence class of tilde containing A or equivalence class of A for the relation tilde. Note that all equivalence classes are non-empty because tilde being an equivalence relation ensures that A belongs in its own equivalence class because of the reflexive property. By this notation, tilde enclosed in closed brackets, we mean the set or family of all distinct equivalence classes. Check that the equivalence classes form a partition of A. In fact, a stronger result holds that A be a non-empty set, then S is a partition of A if and only if it is the set of all distinct equivalence classes for some equivalence relation tilde. The proof is left for you all as an exercise. Now we look at binary operations. A binary operation is simply an operation on a set A is a function from A cross A to A. Say star is an operation on A, then star is a function from A cross A to A. Generally, star of the ordered pair A comma B is represented as A star B for all A comma B belonging to A. For example, our very own addition on real numbers is a binary operation. A star of A and B is actually, that is plus of A and B is actually A plus B. Hence our plus is actually a binary operation. Whenever there is no ambiguity, we usually present A star B as simply AB by assuming the operation. Operations can be injective, surjective or bijective similar to a function. For each A in A, operations naturally induce some relations R subscript A on the set A. Namely, for all x and y in A, x is related to y by the relation RA if and only if star of x and y is equal to A. Now that we have defined binary operations, let us see some types of binary operations. Let star be an operation on A and let B be a subset of A. We say star is associative if and only if for all A, B, C in A star B whole star C is equal to A star whole B star C. That is, the brackets don't matter. We say star is commutative if and only for all A and B in A star B is equal to B star A. We say star can be restricted to B or is B invariant if for all A and B in B, A star B belongs to B. We say that E in A is the identity of star in A if and only if for all A in A, E star A equal to A star E equal to A. That is, E operating on A makes no difference, no matter it is from the left or the right. We assume star has an identity E in A and A in A belongs to A. We say that A is invertible in A with respect to star if there exists B belonging to A such that A star B equal to B star A is equal to identity. That is, we can operate on A with some element B for which it gives us the identity. An important note in this case, A comma star is called an algebraic structure, which we will see in the next slide. As said earlier, binary operators on a set give rise to algebraic structures. Now some examples are, when a set A is equipped with a binary operator say star, this notation A comma star is called a magma. Example is our real numbers with the binary operator minus. Now let's move forward. When a set A is equipped with an associative binary operator say star, A comma star is called a semigroup. Examples is real numbers except 0 with our plus. Again another step forward. When the set A is equipped with an associative binary operator plus it has identity for star, A comma star is called a monoid. For example, integers except 1 with our operation plus. When a set A is equipped with an associative binary operator and has identity and every element is invertible, our A comma star is called a group. Example, Zn plus. Now these structures play a very crucial role in the study of abstract algebra in higher mathematics. However, this will not be discussed here in detail. Now these are some examples of binary operators. For example, plus, minus and multiplication are all binary operations in R. Plus is associative and commutative, it has an identity 0, and for all x in R, minus x is its inverse. Minus is neither associative nor commutative, it has no identity too, because a minus e equal to e minus a equal to a doesn't hold for any e. Multiplication, it is associative and commutative, it has identity 1, and for all x in R minus 0, x inverse is its inverse. By x to the power minus 1, we actually mean the reciprocal of x. Note that division is not a binary operator on R, as 1 divided by 0 is undefined. However, it is an operation on R minus 0. Plus and multiplication are binary operations on Z and N as well. Check that composition is a binary operation on bijections on A for any set A. That is, f star g is equal to f of g. That is, we define the binary operator star as f star g equal to f of g. It is our operation composition is associative but not commutative. It has identity on the set A, and for all f belonging to bijections on A, f inverse is its inverse. So till now we have seen binary operators and their applications in higher mathematics such as abstract algebra by giving rise to algebraic structures such as groups, semigroups, etc. Now we'll see a unique way of studying operators easily. For studying operators on finite sets easily and more systematically, we use tables known as multiplication tables or composition tables as shown below. Note that this table works only for finite sets. Consider the set A equal to the set containing 0, 1, 2 and 3, and the operator star such that A star B equal to A plus B whole mod 4. For now, A plus B whole mod 4 is equal to R, where R is the remainder, the non-negative remainder when divided by 4. Star is also denoted by plus subscript 4 sometimes, or plus 4. This is how the multiplication table of plus 4 looks like. We list out the elements of A in the header row and the header column, and say in general these are the elements A1, A2, A3, A4, A1, A2, A3, A4. Then in this column we fill it up by A1 star A1, A1 star A2, A1 star A3, A1 star A4. This one we fill it by A2 star A1, A2 star A2, A2 star A3, A2 star A4, and similarly we fill up the rest of the rows. So these are the facts which are deducible from the table. If the table is symmetrical about the left diagonal, the operation is commutative. That is, if the table is symmetrical about this diagonal, our operation is commutative. As we can see for the plus 4 operation, the table is indeed symmetrical about the left diagonal, hence plus 4 is commutative. If the row or column headed by an element A in A is the same as the row or column consisting of the column or row heads, then A is called the identity of the operation. And by this we mean, for in this example consider 0, the row headed by 0 is the same as the row consisting of the column heads, and the row and the column headed by 0 is the same as the column with the row heads. From this observation we can say that 0 is the identity of plus 4. Another fact, if the row or column headed by an element A in A contains identities in the column or row headed by B in A, then A and B are inverses of each other. For example, here we take 1, we get identity in the column headed by 3. We take the column headed by 1, we get identity in the row headed by 3. Hence, 1 and 3 are the inverses of each other. Similarly for other elements of A. Thus for plus 4, 4 minus j is the inverse of j equal to 1, 2, 3, and 0 being identity is the inverse of itself. Now we are almost at the end of the lecture. Here is a summary for you. In naive set theory, a set is an unordered collection of well-defined objects. However, naive set theory has its drawbacks. It leads to paradoxes such as Russell's paradox. Because of this, Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory ZF was formulated. Some axioms of ZF are axiom scheme of specification, axiom of pairing, axiom of power set, axiom of union, etc. Axiom schema of specification is the one which prevents a paradox like Russell's paradox to crop up. Let A and B be subsets of a universal set U. Certain important set operations are union. A union B is the set of all x in U such that x is in A or x is in B. Intersection A intersection B is equal to the set of all x in U such that x belongs to A and x belongs to B. Finite Cartesian product A cross B is equal to the set of all ordered pairs A comma B such that A belongs to A and B belongs to B. A relation between two sets A and B is any subset of A cross B. If the ordered pair A comma B belongs to R, we write it as A is R related to B. Some important types of relations on a set A are reflexive relations, symmetric relations, transitive relations, and antisymmetric relations. If a relation is reflexive, symmetric, and transitive at the same time, it is called an equivalence relation. If a relation is reflexive, antisymmetric, and transitive, it is called a partial order relation. If a collection of subsets of a set S, say the set of AIs where I belongs to an indexing set L, is exhaustive and exclusive, it is called a partition of the set S. Equivalence relations on a set partition the set into equivalence classes. A function from a set A to a set B is a relation such that for all A belongs to A, there exists a unique B in B such that A is F related to B. It is usually written as f of A is equal to B, where F is our function. Some types of functions are injective functions, surjective functions, and bijective functions. Bijective functions on a set A are very special and permute the elements of the set A and hence are called permutation functions. Let f a to b be a bijective function, then there exists a function g from b to a such that g of b equal to a if and only if f of a equal to b. This function is called the inverse of f and is denoted by f raised to the power minus 1 and pronounced as f inverse. For any function f from a to b and for all subsets c of a, by f of c we mean the set b in b such that there exists an a in c such that f of a equal to b. Also, we define f inverse, another kind of inverse for f inverse from the power set of b to the power set of a such that f inverse of y equal to the set of all a in a such that f of a belongs to y. This inverse function has certain advantages which are shown in the section Some Properties of Functions Operating on Sets. By this we mean those inequalities which become equalities in terms of f inverse. A binary operation on a set A is a function from A cross A to A. If star is an operation on A, star of the ordered pair A comma B is written as A star B for simplicity. Binary operations on sets give rise to algebraic structures such as magma, semigroup, monoid group, etc. Examples have been cited in previous slides. Also, an important example is the set of bijections on A with the operation composition. It checked that structure is actually a group. Moving to the next point, binary operations can be associative, commutative, or restricted to a subset B or B invariant. Some characteristics of a binary operation over a finite set can be easily studied by a table called the multiplication table or composition table. So we have come to the end of the lecture. If you have any doubts, feel free to contact the mentors or your lecturers through every channel with you. Stay home and stay safe. Thank you.